Sit down, Hale. People like you don't get to fire a chairman. The words detonated in the boardroom like a gavel slammed on glass, loud, sharp, final. Every head turned, every pair of eyes widened, half in shock, half in amusement. The insult wasn't just personal. It was public. Delivered with a grin, with power assumed, not earned. And then came his reply. Calm. Deadly. 45 minutes from now, you won't have a chairman to defend. A hush. A tension so thick you could hear the clock tick once on the far wall before anyone dared breathe. This was no ordinary meeting. It had started like every other: leather seats, polished table, the smell of expensive cologne and stale confidence. But the moment Marcus Hale, a black man in a tailored gray suit, had walked in without a title on his badge, the decision had already been made for him. They'd chosen his place beneath them. The mockery came first in whispers, then in smirks, then in open laughter. Outsider investor. He should just watch and learn. This isn't his league. Until that final blow, the one that made the temperature in the room drop 10 degrees, people like you don't get to fire a chairman. Marcus didn't flinch. Didn't blink. He only leaned back, eyes scanning the faces that had written him off. And in that instant, you could almost feel a storm gathering behind his stillness, the reckoning tightening its grip on this room. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here. Now, back to Marcus. Today, he came as a silent investor. But they forgot one thing about silence: it always breaks before it strikes. The boardroom had been designed to intimidate. Walls of smoked glass, a skyline view of the city's tallest towers, chairs so deep they seemed to swallow anyone who sat in them. Every detail whispered prestige, power, exclusivity. But prestige can't buy decency. Power can't buy class. And today, both were on full display. Marcus Hale walked in with no entourage, no fanfare. A simple gray suit, a navy tie, polished shoes, a leather notebook in his hand. No nameplate waiting for him at the table. No glass of water poured in advance like the others. To them, he was just another face in the crowd. They didn't see the man who had financed their last 3 acquisitions. They didn't see the silent partner who'd covered their mistakes with his money and reputation. They only saw what they wanted to see: an outsider with the wrong skin, the wrong tone, the wrong presence. The meeting started without acknowledging him. Slides flashed across a giant screen. Buzzwords flew: expansion, synergy, risk appetite. Every decision rolled past him like he wasn't there. When he raised a point about flawed projections, one director waved a dismissive hand. We'll handle the technicalities. You just watch. His jaw tightened for half a second. Then, nothing. He simply scribbled a note, ice calm but sharp as glass. That's when the snickers began. Small at first. A shared look between 2 executives. A muttered rookie from the vice chair. Even the chairman leaned over to whisper, just loud enough for others to hear, not his lane. The kind of mockery designed not to wound, but to erase. And yet, Marcus didn't bite. He didn't push back. Instead, he studied every smirk, every dismissive wave, every phrase dripping in arrogance, filing them away like evidence in a trial he knew he would win. The only person who noticed was a young analyst at the far end of the table. She watched him closely, discomfort flickering in her eyes. She glanced down at her phone, quietly tapping the voice recorder. Something told her this meeting was about to matter far beyond these walls. The tension thickened when one director shoved a file toward him, papers spilling onto the polished wood. You can review those later, the man said, lips curling. Right now, let's let the real decision-makers talk. A murmur of agreement rippled across the room. Laughter not loud, but enough to sting followed. Marcus straightened the scattered papers with deliberate care. His voice, when it came, was soft, measured. Interesting thing about real decision-makers, he said, not looking up. They don't need to announce themselves. It was the first crack in their armor. Not enough to break the facade of superiority, but enough to draw a few uneasy glances. None of them knew that behind that quiet, he'd already started a countdown. 45 minutes. That's all it would take to remind them who truly owned this table and who didn't deserve to sit at it at all. The tension in the boardroom didn't settle, thickened. Every minute Marcus sat there quietly, the mockery grew bolder, louder, more careless. It started with a smirk from the vice chair as Marcus tried to raise a point on projected earnings. "We'll let the adults handle this," he said, dismissing him without looking up from his tablet. A ripple of chuckles followed, bouncing around the polished wood table like a cruel echo. Another director leaned forward, voice dripping with mock sympathy. "It's cute you want to contribute," she said, sliding his printed notes aside with a manicured finger. "But this is high-level strategy. Maybe just observe?" Laughter again. Short, sharp, toxic. Marcus didn't move. Didn't speak. His hand rested on the table, fingers tracing the edge of a pen like he was measuring the room's pulse. The chairman leaned back in his oversized leather seat, crossing his arms with smug certainty. "Let's keep the conversation to those of us who know the business," he announced, loud enough to make sure the jab hit its target. A few heads turned toward Marcus, expecting him to snap, to argue, to prove his worth. He didn't. He simply shifted his gaze, scanning each face one by one, his silence heavier than their noise. At the far end, the young analyst bit her lip, glancing between Marcus and the rest of the board. Her phone, still angled low on her lap, glowed red, the voice recorder catching every word, every insult. She looked like she wanted to speak up, to say what everyone outside this bubble would know instantly. This wasn't strategy, this was arrogance wearing a suit. Then came the worst blow yet. One of the senior partners reached across, grabbing the folder Marcus had prepared and sliding it to the far side of the table like trash being cleared from a diner. Pages fluttered to the floor. "We don't need outside opinions clogging up the table," he sneered. "This isn't a charity." The chairman didn't stop him. He smirked, adjusted his cufflinks, and added the line that made the room ice over. "People like you should listen, not decide." The words landed like a stone dropped in water, first a ripple, then a wave that silenced every whisper, every click of a pen. Even the analyst's breath caught in her throat. Marcus slowly bent down, picked up the scattered pages, stacked them neatly, and placed them back in front of him. He didn't look at the man who'd shoved them away. He didn't look at the chairman. He only said one thing, his voice quiet but heavy enough to make the laughter die on their lips. "Every seat in this room was bought with someone's investment." A pause. "Today, you're going to learn who really paid for yours." The storm hadn't broken yet. But every face at that table felt it coming. The boardroom went unnaturally still. Not because respect had arrived, but because tension had settled in like fog rolling over a city street, thick, damp, suffocating. Marcus didn't lift his eyes from the pages in front of him. Not yet. He turned each sheet slowly, deliberately, like time itself belonged to him and no one else in that room could touch it. The whispers that had fueled the mockery moments ago faded, replaced by uneasy shuffling and the occasional throat clear. The chairman tried to reclaim the air. "All right," he said with a forced laugh, glancing around at the other directors, "let's move on to real business." But his voice cracked on real, as if some part of him already sensed this wasn't his meeting anymore. Marcus uncapped his pen, wrote a single note in clean, sharp handwriting, and set it down next to his phone. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't demand attention. But somehow, every person in the room started glancing at him, one by one, like gravity itself had shifted to his end of the table. The analyst at the far corner sat straighter, her thumb hovering over the pause button of her recorder, unsure if this silence was just a pause or the beginning of something irreversible. Finally, Marcus looked up. His eyes weren't angry. They weren't even cold. They were precise, like a surgeon's scalpel before the first cut. He spoke softly, but every syllable landed like a hammer on glass. "Every number you discussed today," he tapped the thick binder of financial reports that had been ignored for the past half hour, "exists because of capital that didn't come from this table." A pause. The kind that made even the breathing in the room feel too loud. "But you treat that capital, and the man who brought it, as an inconvenience." No one moved. Not the chairman, not the vice chair, not even the smug partner who'd brushed his notes aside. Their smirks had vanished, replaced with the kind of silence that comes when a mirror is held up unexpectedly. Marcus leaned back slowly, his voice dropping even lower, forcing them to lean in to hear. You've mistaken silence for weakness. You've mistaken patience for permission. The young analyst's pen froze mid-note. Her heart pounded like she was hearing the opening line of a verdict. Then Marcus reached for his phone. Not in haste, not with drama. Calm, measured, deliberate. He unlocked it with a touch, dialed a single number, and waited. The ring barely lasted 2 seconds before someone answered on the other end. Protocol Alpha, Marcus said simply, eyes never leaving the chairman. Full authority confirmation. 10 minutes. He ended the call and set the phone down face up on the table. A small, green indicator light blinked on its corner. Every executive who noticed it suddenly shifted in their seats, sensing that whatever power they thought they had was about to be audited in real time. Marcus folded his hands neatly in front of him. His voice, quiet as ever, slid across the room like a whisper. You couldn't ignore. This table has been borrowed for too long. I think it's time to remind everyone who owns it. No one laughed this time. No one dared. The weight in the room shifted. Not just heavy, now electric. You could almost hear the fluorescent lights buzzing above as if they knew something was about to change. At the far end of the long mahogany table, the young analyst glanced around nervously. She had sat through countless board meetings before, the kind where arrogance floated like perfume and truth never got an invitation. But this one felt different. She stared at Marcus Hale, the man everyone had mocked minutes ago, as he sat perfectly still, phone face up, that green indicator light blinking like a countdown only he could see. The rest of the board squirmed in their seats, glancing at each other but avoiding his eyes. Her thumb hovered over her phone's screen. She'd been recording the whole time. Every dismissive laugh. Every insult. Every people like you that had rolled off their tongues like it was company policy. She wasn't supposed to do this. She was the quiet one. The observer. The invisible assistant who fetched coffee, clicked slides, took notes no one read. But today, her stomach twisted in anger she couldn't swallow anymore. She tapped the video button. A soft click as the red circle lit up on her screen. She angled the camera low, catching the chairman's smug posture, the vice chair's crossed arms, the empty respect that filled this room. A whisper left her lips, barely audible. This needs to be seen. Marcus caught the movement. He didn't stop her. Didn't nod, didn't give permission. He simply met her eyes for the first time that morning. A silent understanding passed between them. You're not crazy, this is wrong, and you're not alone. The chairman noticed the shift in the air. He sat forward, trying to reclaim his throne with bluster. Let's proceed, he barked, as if nothing had changed. Mr. Hale can have his say after we've handled actual business. Actual business. The words dripped with the same poison as before, but now they didn't land the same way. The analyst's camera caught every inch of the room as it turned slightly, as if the walls themselves leaned closer, waiting. Marcus didn't react. His silence wasn't passive, Anna Marie, it was charged, alive, a pressure that made every other man at that table shift in his seat. The analyst held her phone steady. For the first time in her career, she wasn't just a note-taker. She was a witness. And though she didn't know it yet, before this day ended, the footage she was quietly capturing would rewrite the rules of this boardroom forever. The chairman leaned forward, elbows on the polished wood, his voice rising like he'd just remembered who he thought he was. Let me make this simple, Mr. Hale, he said, drawing out every syllable like Marcus needed the reminder. We don't need background investors thinking they can rewrite the rules in here. A murmur of agreement rolled through the table, shallow and desperate. One director tapped his pen loudly as if that made his words more valid. Another smirked, leaning back with a theatrical sigh. This is a boardroom, not an open mic, he muttered, not quietly enough. The vice chair chimed in next, his tone dripping false concern. We value diversity of opinion, Marcus, but let's be real. Some decisions require experience you just don't have. The arrogance wasn't whispered anymore. It was on display, bold and deliberate, a performance for each other, for the hierarchy they believed could never be touched. Marcus stayed silent. He didn't flinch when another director slid his notes farther down the table again, or when the chairman gave him that patronizing smile politicians wear when they think they've already won. Then came the blow that cracked even the analyst's composure. The chairman leaned closer, voice low but cutting enough for the whole room to hear. The real players are at this end of the table. People like you. His eyes flicked to Marcus's skin, then to his plain, unbranded watch. You should be grateful just to watch how it's done. No one gasped. No one objected. Silence wasn't discomfort here, it was complicity. But the analyst's phone didn't stay still. The red recording light caught every frame, the sneer, the glances, the quiet approval from men who traded conscience for comfort years ago. Marcus finally looked up. Not with anger. Not with hurt. His eyes were steady, a storm kept under glass. He said nothing. Just let the words hang there, rot there, until they stank up the entire room. The chairman, mistaking silence for surrender, smiled wider, his voice carrying like a cheap victory lap. See, gentlemen, this is why we keep control tight. Otherwise, anyone with a few shares thinks he owns the place. In 45 minutes, that sentence would taste like ash in his mouth. But right now, arrogance was king. And the entire room bowed to it. The clock on the wall ticked at 10:42 a.m. And that's when arrogance stopped being just words and turned into an act no one could take back. The chairman reached for Marcus's binder again, this time with deliberate disdain, flipping through the pages he hadn't bothered to read. Outdated projections, he scoffed, snapping the folder shut like it was trash. Then, with a flick of his wrist, he tossed it across the table. It slid, hit the edge, and spilled papers to the floor near the analyst's chair. The vice chair laughed, leaning back in his seat. Next time, bring a real contribution, he said. Not whatever this is. Another director added, voice low but cruel enough to cut, money doesn't buy you vision, Hale. Stick to writing checks, leave thinking to us. But the final blow came from the chairman himself. He stood now, walking the length of the table like a general surveying conquered land. When he reached Marcus's side, he bent slightly, his tone dripping venom disguised as mentorship. You need to understand your place here, he said, every syllable deliberate. This table? This company? It's not built for you. You're tolerated. A courtesy seat. Nothing more. He straightened, adjusting his tie, and delivered the line that froze the entire room. People like you don't decide the future. People like me do. Gasps didn't come. Not because the words weren't shocking, but because no one in that room had the courage to break rank. A few shifted uncomfortably, others smirked, pretending to check their phones. The analyst's hands shook as she kept recording, her thumb gripping the phone like a lifeline. Marcus moved for the first time in minutes. Slowly, deliberately, he gathered the scattered pages from the floor. He didn't rush, didn't respond, didn't even glance at the chairman towering over him. When he was done, he stacked them neatly, tapped them once against the table, and set them aside. Then he looked up not at the chairman, but straight down the line of executives, meeting every pair of eyes that dared meet his. And with a voice that didn't rise above a calm conversation, he said, every empire built on disrespect eventually burns. 45 minutes from now, you'll learn just how fast a fire can start. For the first time that morning, the laughter didn't come back. The storm was now undeniable, coiled tight and waiting to strike. The clock read 10:45 a.m. Marcus didn't look shaken. Not even close. He leaned back in his chair, his posture loose but unyielding, like a lion watching prey circle too close. Then, without ceremony, he reached for his phone. The boardroom shifted uneasily. Something in the way he moved, slow, deliberate, certain, felt different. Like gravity had shifted toward him. He unlocked his phone with a single tap, scrolled once, and pressed a number that had been waiting for this moment. Evelyn, he said when the line picked up, his voice low but laced with steel, activate Protocol Alpha. Full authority confirmation, live feed access to this room in 10 minutes. The other end answered swiftly, understood, Mr. Hale. Legal, compliance, and executive support are on standby. You'll have full board override authority shortly. He ended the call without another word and set the phone down, face up, the green light blinking brighter this time. The small detail didn't go unnoticed. Several directors exchanged nervous glances, confusion flickering behind their practiced confidence. The chairman scoffed, trying to mask the unease creeping into his tone. "Protocol Alpha," he repeated with a laugh that landed flat. "What is this, some kind of drama? You think dialing your assistant changes who runs this table?" Marcus finally looked at him, his gaze steady, unblinking. "No," he said, voice calm enough to chill the air. "I don't think it changes who runs this table. I know it confirms it." The room went quiet, every shuffle of paper and click of pen suddenly too loud. The analyst's phone kept recording, capturing the first crack in their arrogance. One director shifted in his seat, the smirk gone, replaced by a flicker of doubt. Marcus leaned forward just enough for his presence to cut through the tension like a blade. "For 30 minutes, I've listened to lectures about real decision-makers." He tapped the table once, softly, yet it echoed like a gavel. "But what you forgot is this power isn't claimed by shouting the loudest. It's signed into every document you never bothered to read. And I hold more of those signatures than anyone in this room." The chairman opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The storm that had been gathering since Marcus first sat down had finally rolled an end for the first time. They all felt the rain coming. The clock's second hand ticked toward 10:50 a.m. The room felt smaller now, every inch of the polished table heavy with anticipation. Marcus Hale stood slowly, no rush, no theatrics. He picked up his binder, the same one they'd tossed aside minutes ago, and placed it squarely in front of him. His hands rested on it, steady as stone. "You've been asking who has the right to speak here," he began, his voice even, but it carried an edge sharp enough to cut through the air. "Let's settle that now." He opened the binder, flipping past the financial projections, the ignored reports, until he reached a stack of documents embossed with a gold company seal. He held them up, eyes locked on the chairman. "These," he said, his tone low but commanding, "are ownership records. Dated, notarized, and filed with the SEC. They show a controlling stake of 38% in this company." He let the words hang there. 38%. Nearly double what any other board member held. Enough to sway every vote, shape every policy, decide every seat including the one at the head of this table. A murmur rippled down the line of directors. The vice chair leaned forward, squinting at the documents as if disbelief might rewrite the ink. Someone else shifted uncomfortably, tapping nervously at their tablet. Marcus placed a second sheet down, a signed agreement bearing the company's own letterhead. "This one," he said, "lists me as the largest active investor and principal underwriter for your last 3 acquisitions. The deals you all took bonuses for? They exist because I made them happen." The analyst at the far end blinked hard, phone still recording. This wasn't just a defense. This was an earthquake tearing through the foundations of everything they thought they owned. Finally, Marcus lifted his gaze and let it sweep the room, settling on each face long enough to make them drop their eyes. "So, when you tell me people like me don't belong at this table," he said, his voice calm but dangerous, "you're forgetting one thing: this table exists because of me." He turned deliberately toward the chairman, stepping closer until the power dynamic that had dominated the morning flipped on its head. "And in 15 minutes, Marcus continued, his tone sharpening to a verdict, this chair you're clinging to won't be yours anymore. You mocked the wrong man in the wrong room." Silence slammed down like a gavel. No one laughed this time. The only sound was the analyst's phone capturing the moment arrogance met its reckoning. The clock struck 11 o'clock a.m., and the boardroom no longer belonged to the men who had mocked Marcus Hale 30 minutes earlier. The silence that followed his revelation wasn't common, was chaos holding its breath. You could see it in every twitch of a finger, every darting glance between directors who suddenly looked very small in their leather chairs. The vice chair swallowed hard, his earlier smirk gone, voice barely above a whisper. 38%? That can't be right. He reached for his tablet, tapping furiously, pulling up the ownership ledger he had ignored for years. His face drained of color when the number appeared exactly as Marcus had said. Another director fumbled with his phone, whispering into it like a drowning man calling for help. "Check the records," he hissed to whoever was on the other end, "find out how this happened." The chairman sat frozen, eyes locked on Marcus like he was seeing him for the first time, not as an outsider, but as a man who could decide his future with a single word. His hand clenched around his pen until it snapped, a faint crack echoing across the polished table. The young analyst glanced at Marcus, her camera still rolling, breath shaky as she caught every second of the unraveling power. For the first time since she started this job, she watched the untouchable men in this room look afraid. Marcus didn't need to raise his voice. He simply reached for his phone again, tapping once to reopen the line with his assistant. The green indicator light flashed brighter as Evelyn's voice came through, crisp and unshaken. "Mr. Hale, corporate legal is on standby. Do you wish to proceed with authority execution?" Every head snapped toward Marcus, panic flaring in their eyes. The chairman's voice cracked as he finally spoke, desperate, unsteady. "Marcus, let's not make this personal. We can talk terms." Marcus didn't even glance his way. He kept his gaze on the blinking green light, then on the trembling hands of men who had treated him like he didn't matter. His reply was soft, but it hit like thunder in a locked room. "It became personal the second you decided my worth was measured by your prejudice." The analyst's heart pounded as she realized this was no longer just a tense meeting. This was a reckoning, live and undeniable. The people who had mocked Marcus Hale were now waiting for his verdict. And in the pit of every stomach in that room, one truth settled heavy as stone: the countdown had started, and the man they dismissed was about to decide who stayed and who left. The clock's red second hand swept to 11:05 a.m. And in that instant, the power dynamic flipped for good. Marcus Hale stood tall at the head of the table, not because anyone had offered him the chairman's seat, but because everyone knew it already belonged to him. He picked up his phone, pressed a single button, and Evelyn's voice filled the boardroom over speaker. "Mr. Hale, corporate legal and executive compliance are live on this line. All board actions you initiate are binding, effective immediately." The chairman shifted in his seat, face pale, eyes darting to his fellow directors for support. None came. One by one, they avoided his gaze, as if distance could save them from what was about to happen. Marcus didn't look at Evelyn, didn't look at his phone. He kept his eyes locked on the man who had spent the morning trying to humiliate him. "Chairman Davis," Marcus began, his tone calm but ringing with finality, "this company was built on investments that deserved respect. Instead, you spent your tenure trading respect for ego, turning this board into a stage for your arrogance." He stepped closer, placing a document on the tablet, a printed copy of his controlling stake, signed and sealed. The sound of paper hitting wood was louder than any shout. "As of this moment," Marcus said, his voice slicing the air, "you are relieved of your duties as chairman of this board, effective immediately, for misconduct, breach of fiduciary responsibility, and documented discrimination witnessed by every person in this room." A gasp escaped from somewhere near the end of the table. The analyst's phone caught every flicker of fear, every widened eye, every twitch of realization that the untouchable had just been touched. The chairman lurched to his feet, sputtering, You can't do this." But Evelyn's voice cut through him like a blade. "This decision is lawful, binding, and recognized under Shareholder Authority Section 14b. Chairman Davis, you are now formally removed. Security will escort you from the premises within the hour." Marcus didn't move, didn't flinch. He simply leaned in, eyes steady on Davis. 45 minutes ago, you told me people like me don't get to fire a chairman," he said, voice low and powerful. "Today, I proved you wrong in front of everyone." The boardroom was silent. Not corporate silence, not awkward silence. The kind of silence that comes when truth walks in and shame has nowhere to hide. The analyst lowered her phone slowly, a single tear welling in the corner of her eye, not from sadness, but from witnessing justice, real and unfiltered, for the first time in her career. The clock read 11:12 a.m. when security arrived at the glass doors of the boardroom. Not with urgency, not with noise, just quiet authority. The kind of presence that didn't need to be announced. Chairman Davis stood frozen, his face a storm of denial and disbelief. But no argument came, no last defense. The only sound was the shuffle of his papers as they were gathered by someone else, handed back to him like belongings to a man no longer welcome in his own house. One by one, the directors leaned back in their chairs, watching power exit the room on unsteady legs. Some looked ashamed. Others just looked scared. The vice chair muttered under his breath, "I didn't sign up for this," as if that absolved years of silence. Marcus Hale didn't move until Davis was halfway to the door. Then his voice came, not loud, not angry, just final. "Remember this moment," he said, the words cutting through the still air like a clean blade. "Power without respect is borrowed. And today, you lost both. Davis paused, his hand on the doorknob, but didn't turn around. He walked out, security closing the glass doors behind him with a soft click that sounded like the end of an era. Marcus turned, his gaze sweeping the table. No one met his eyes. They stared at their notes, their screens, their own hands as if realizing how small their power had always been. The young analyst, phone still in hand, looked up at him. And for the first time all morning, Marcus allowed the corner of his mouth to lift in the faintest note of silent acknowledgement that truth had witnesses today. That it wouldn't be buried. He gathered his papers, straightened them with deliberate care, and walked to the head of the table. Not to sit, not to gloat, but to reclaim the space that had been denied to him minutes before. He rested one hand on the chair they had tried to keep from him and spoke to the room, his tone steady, unshaken. This table doesn't belong to titles. It doesn't belong to prejudice dressed as tradition. It belongs to accountability. Starting today, that's the only thing that earns you a seat here. No one clapped. No one dared argue. The only sound was the quiet, unsteady breathing of men who had finally understood that power didn't look like them anymore. Marcus turned toward the window. The skyline stretched before him, a city built on deals and decisions just like this one. But for the first time, it felt like something different had been built in that room, something heavier than authority, something stronger than wealth. Respect. As he left the boardroom, documents in hand, silence followed him, not the silence they'd used to erase him, but the silence that comes when truth leaves no room for noise. And in offices across the city, news was already spreading. The man they mocked had fired the chairman. The table they guarded had a new name on it. And it would never forget how it was won.